There is something truly pure and nostalgic about playing any Doom game. Like many gamers, I have fond memories of playing the original Doom on PC back in the day, and have amazing memories of watching my dad play and then taking my turn only to get pulverised pretty quickly. Doom as a franchise has had its ups and downs, but for me, Doom is like any of those long-standing television show hosts. No matter how outdated they become, you can't help but still have a love towards them, and in many cases, Doom clung on to this nostalgic appreciation for a long time. I've told the story before about how the Christmas I got my N64, the game I really wanted was GoldenEye. But due to its insane popularity, it was sold out most places in the UK, so my parents got me Doom 64. Whilst at first I was naturally disappointed, this quickly disappeared when I realised exactly what Doom 64 had to offer. Being a fairly early N64 title, it would have been easy to assume that Doom 64 would be a straight port of one of the best-selling Doom PC games, designed to cash in on early N64 adopters who were desperate for new games to play. Fortunately, Midway, who developed and published the game in 1997, had different ideas and set about utilising the trusted and safe Doom gameplay, but created an entirely new game for Nintendo's latest hardware. The story is as basic as ever. Our Space Marine enters a space colony and surprise surprise it's overrun by the demons of hell once again. And no surprises, it's your job to work your way through the maze-like levels, collect the keys to access further sections, explore uncover secret areas, and utilise an epic arsenal of weaponry to plough through the thousands of enemies. It's safe to say that if you want a gripping story, then play something else, because Doom 64 is all about fast-paced action, and contained in this cart is a huge amount of it. In terms of gameplay, anyone who's played a Doom game before will pretty much know what to expect. If something moves, then you can kill it. And like most retro-inspired first-person shooter games, there's no hassle of worrying about hostages or protecting key characters in order to drive the story forward. Some might argue that Midway could and maybe should have added more elements to the game to enhance it, but in my opinion the simplicity of the gameplay is one of its charms. But what Midway did add makes this game in my opinion one of the best Doom games ever made. The new engine is built for the game and it's extremely impressive. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't GoldenEye. However, everything runs at a smooth frame rate and everything scrolls smoothly, and with a new level of fluidity not seen in a Doom game before. If you've played Doom on the Super Nintendo or the 32X for example, you'll instantly see how impressive this engine is. Adding to this level of gameplay are the controls, which at first are disappointing. However, with a quick change in the options menu, you can set the controls up in a way that are perfect. Use the analog stick for movement, the Z button for firing, the aim B buttons to scroll weapons, and the C buttons to strafe. The control just seems to be nothing less than ideal for the game. Without having to stop and make pinpoint shots on enemies, it allows the game to have a fast-paced flow which is simply thrilling. You will need a mix of run and gun blazing crossed with times of taking pot shots and then retreating back. When combined with the perfectly balanced level design, Doom 64 feels a pleasure to play and always keeps you wanting to go back to try more, despite the numerous deaths that you will no doubt encounter. Graphically, there are pros and cons. On the negative side are the enemies. Without being polygon based, they do lack a certain level of detail and animation which even on its release we were used to. The enemies look flat, and whilst there are many new additions to the roster for Doom 64, nothing can take away from the fact that they don't look detailed enough, and for me personally this was very disappointing. On the flip side, the rest of the graphics are great in my opinion. The lighting effects must get a special mention. With Doom being a dark and eerie game, the lighting effects which the engine now allows means that creeping down corridors or entering dimly lit areas really adds to the overall macabre atmosphere of the game, and it really draws you into the game's dark and depressing world. I have mentioned this previously and also mentioned it when I did a live stream of the game, and that's that the default contrast setting of the game is simply wrong. If you play the game for the first time, you might think you have a broken TV or cart. The screen is just too dark. Not dark as in atmospheric, dark in a sense that you can hardly see what's going on. Going into the settings menu and increasing the brightness alleviates this problem somewhat, but even on the max brightness there will be times when things are just too dark and it makes you wonder what Midway were thinking. Another weakness of the game comes in the form of its AI. I hate to mention it again, but in comparison to GoldenEye this is night and day, and let's not forget they were released very close to one another. Doom 64's AI is very poor. Enemies will either stand on the spot attacking you whilst you unload bullet after bullet into them, or they'll move directly towards you. Rather than placing strategic enemies who'll move behind cover or tactically approach you, Doom 64 prefers the old school method of just placing tons of enemies in your way in the hope that they'll inflict damage on you. Funnily enough however, the enemies will sometimes fight amongst one another, and if you cause them to accidentally hit each other, they will then continue to attack, and this tactic is especially useful in areas where there are large swarms of enemies. For me, however, one of the strongest areas of the game is in its sound department. Whilst the old Doom games relied on gritty synth, rock-inspired music, Doom 64 has an ambient soundtrack. What does this mean? Well, instead of having specific tunes for each level, the game has a more subtle approach. The music is more of background noise with low bass levels and the odd eerie sound effect thrown in. When I first heard this was going to be in the game, I didn't like the sound of it. However, when playing, it really draws you into the game. It adds a sense of mood and tone and suspense to the game, and when combined with the excellent lighting that I mentioned previously, it helps to create an atmosphere not seen in a Doom game before. Reviewing Doom 64 when it was released must have been quite a challenge. The game was clearly already out of date and lacked features such as multiplayer, which were already making the N64 console the choice for multiplayer gamers. However, with retrospect, we can now look at Doom 64 for what it is in itself, rather than what it's up against. Doom 64 is a great game which has been overlooked for far too long. While everyone remembers a classic such as GoldenEye, Perfect Dark and so on, Doom 64 doesn't even get much of a mention or a look in, and I suspect that's because many gamers have forgotten just about how simplistic first-person shooter games can be and still be fun at the same time. Sure, it doesn't have the multiplayer or unique game mechanics we now expect, but Doom 64 was never intended to be like that. If anything, Doom 64 was a farewell gift to the old school style of the genre. It took everything that made Doom games great and enhanced it rather than reimagining it. Doom 64 is that last day at high school. You know everything's going to change and become more complex, but you just don't want it to. Doom 64 says screw college. Why be a nothing in college when I can be the king of high school forever? Doom 64 is the pinnacle of the pure, unadulterated first-person shooter games. Doom 64 2 was planned, but after the game fell flat on its release, the sequel was canned. The game only sold 2,000 copies in Japan on its first week of sale, and across the world it didn't fare much better, and it soon found its way into bargain bins all over the world. In closing, do I think you'll like Doom 64? Well, that's a difficult one to say. If you play the first few levels and don't like it, you never will, and you'll be wondering what the heck this review was all about. If, however, like me, you think modern first-person shooter games are nothing more than an annual cash-in on piles of crap, generic space combat games, and multiplayer deathmatches, and it's a way for Activision to make more money every single year, then give this game a try. It's gritty, it's gory, and nothing will say 90s game more than Doom 64. So how do you remember Doom 64? Did you skip this to pick up GoldenEye, or like me, did you get this game first and adore it for its nostalgic brilliance and simpler gameplay? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time.